So a big welcome, everyone, to today's Menopause at Work network meeting. And these meetings are designed for professionals like you to come together, to connect, and to share what we're learning about how can we best support people who are going through the menopause transition in the workplace. So for those of you who I haven't met, my name's Thea O'Connor, and I'm a workplace wellbeing advisor. And I've been bringing menopause literacy to Australian workplaces since I started toying with it at the end of 2018 and then beginning of 2019. And today I'm really glad to be joined by Melissa McGowan. Do you want to give us a wave, Melissa? Yay. And Melissa is from Go to Grow. She's a mother of 4 kids, 2 dogs. She's a former HR executive, menopause champion, and she coaches executives and also aspiring executives so that they can form at their peak and without the burnout. So that's a really important cause, a mission you're pursuing there, Melissa. So, 5 years ago when I started raising awareness about this topic, hardly anyone wanted to talk about it, apart from a few early trailblazers. But today we're having a national conversation about it at the highest level of government, as evidenced by the recent federal Senate inquiry into menopause, which is currently underway. And I was invited to give evidence at that about 2 weeks ago. Just a few pointers around language today. I use menopause as shorthand for the whole transition, which of course includes perimenopause as well. And when I talk about women, I'm including anyone who was born with a female physiology. Okay, so at the Senate inquiry, what was really interesting was there were over 200 submissions, and the vast majority of them mentioned the impact of menopause on work. Although I would kind of, like to qualify that a little bit and say, is it just menopause, or is it when women are uneducated, unsupported, untreated, if that's what's needed, and they're going into workplaces when you can't talk about it? All of those factors are preventable. I think that's what impacts workplace performance the most. There were also some submissions that warned that raising awareness about menopause in the workplace could actually reinforce negative stereotypes of midlife women. Maybe it would lead to discrimination in hiring practices if women were seen as less competent or more expensive options. Or it could just generate a sense of not fair from the people who don't experience menopause. And this concern I am quite familiar with, and it's been expressed by a number of people in different ways over the years. And here's one example of an article that was published last year in the Sydney Morning Herald. Want to help women's career prospects? Shut up about menopause. A few years earlier, there was an article by Anne Widdecombe, who's a British politician, and she wrote this big piece. I did it on my own and I didn't need any special privileges. And in her article, she says, we've worked so hard for a level playing field. Now you're asking for it to be tilted because of our biology. You're betraying everything that we've worked from. So it's quite a strong sentiment. It's not by any means the most common one when we go into workplaces. We're normally welcomed with open arms. But because it does keep coming up, I thought it'd be really great to go there today and to look at these fears and concerns, whether they're real or perceived. So we're going to look at it, and we're going to look at what are some really practical things you might be able to do to mitigate any risks, again, whether they're real or perceived. We really do want to tap into your experience. And that's why we are going to have a breakout room fairly early up, because this is a network meeting. It's not just a webinar, one-way webinar. And then at 1 o'clock, we turn off the recording and we have 15 minutes of informal discussion at the end of the session as well. So yeah, really keen to hear your experience and to feed into this. And with all these meetups, I just think of them as a learning environment where we're all here to learn something. So, an open mind, I think, is what we're encouraging here, rather than there has to be one right way of doing things. So just in the spirit of finding out what experience we do have in the room, I'm just really interested to know, of those of you that are here today, is your workplace doing anything around menopause? And you can see some options there. And you should be able to tick more than one. And if the internet is on my side today, that poll will work that way. So I'll just give you a moment to fill that out. Okay, let's see how we're going. About 70% of you have answered, so I'll give you just another 30 seconds to do that. And excuse me, we'll have a little sip of water. Okay, well, I will, I will share this with you in a moment, but about 38% are saying, no, we're not doing anything at the moment. And then there's a range after that. And I might just end the poll now and share it with you so that you can see who else is in the room. So about 38% not doing anything. So maybe you're here to help you think about how might be a good way to introduce the topic in your workplace. But a good third produce some kind of share some kind of resources, a third offering staff education, 8% doing manager training, 15% a policy or guidelines, and 20% of you have thought about accommodations in relation to menopause. Great. So as I said, a lovely amount of experience there, and I hope that you'll contribute in the chat box and when it comes to chat time at the end. Thanks so much for sharing that. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing this screen here as well. So I guess our starting point for today is that, silence is no longer an option. That's where we're starting from, because don't talk about it. That has been the default position in workplaces for quite a long time. And I maintain, and I think Melissa does as well, and probably, hopefully many of you on the line, is that it's the silence, it's the not being able to say what's happening to you. That is what can make women look inept. And I want to kind of demonstrate that by sharing a little video here. And just give me a moment to get that going. Sorry, I'm just going to do that again because I need to optimize the video. Might be a little catchy, but hopefully this will go well. So I want to share a video with you, which has actually gone viral, and some of you may have seen it before. I'm going to pause in a couple of minutes, make a comment, and then keep going. So just get the microphone on. And Melissa, can you just give me a thumbs up? Can you see that video okay? Great. Here we go.
As the latest on the Prime Minister's visit to China.
Yes, another pardon, Michael. Big chill, but the PM doesn't pander yet. So the bilateral meeting between Australia and China, Anthony Albanese and Chinese.
Okay, so up until that point, perhaps you would agree that for a journalist, she's not seeming terribly articulate. Yeah, she's stumbling a bit, finding it hard to get her words. And if we just took that at face value, you might think, oh, she's not really on her game. Okay, let's proceed.
I'm so sorry. I could keep stumbling through this, but I am having such a perimenopausal gosh, right now, live on air. I'm so sorry.
Imogen, the point about this is that we need to make it normal to have these kinds of conversations, and I love you for even saying it, because we interview people, we talk to people about this, and this is the reality.
I don't think hormones respect national television.
No.
Yeah.
It's the furnace of the sun.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, listen, we'll let you take a breather.
Oh, it's fine.
No, thank you for being 100%. Thank you for being honest about it. We can, and while Imogen takes in some deep breaths, listen, we want to throw it over to you. I'll ask you about the impact of this latest interest rate.
Okay, I'll stop that there. So can you see that under conditions of silence, she looks inept? We don't actually know what's going on, and you could attribute it to a personal failing. But when she's able to name it, that totally explains what's happening, and we can attribute that temporary fluctuation in performance to a biological event that will pass quite soon. It's really interesting, Imogen, she became an overnight hit around the world, and she was also, which I was really glad, gave evidence at the Senate inquiry. But also the reason why we say silence is no longer an option, and that's our starting point, is you might have noticed that menopause has been having its own Me Too movement around the world. There's so much more awareness now. People are talking about it. And today I'm finding that workplaces are saying our staff are asking for this. So the conversations have started. So it's just about how can we help shape them so that they're as constructive as possible, and to help make sure that we do no harm. So we're going to get Melissa to share some of her thoughts soon, and then I'll share some as well. But first of all, we just want you to get into some breakout rooms and just to talk about what has your experience been so far. So if you haven't done anything about menopause, that's fine. But have you heard of any kind of possible responses from your colleagues? If you are doing some awareness or training, what has the staff response been so far? Well, I'm just going to run another little poll now because I'm really interested just to capture your experience and whether at all any of you have experience in your own workplace, any kind of negativity about this idea or any kind of backlash in any shape or form. And I'll just let that poll run for a little bit. And just while we're waiting for the final results, which I will share with you, but for those of you who have experienced some kind of negative response in your workplace, do you mind just dropping in the chat box just to try and capture the essence of what that was about? So just to get a sense of what have the objections been, or what did the negativity or backlash look like or sound like? Do you mind just giving us a sense of what that has been? Because then we might be able to bounce off that during the rest of the session. And I'll just end that poll and share the results with you. So for 76%, no, 24% saying yes. I used to work in a barber shop. I don't think I would have had the courage to bring it up there. Sure. Yeah, is anyone else willing to share those who are in the yeses? So someone has said this is because we don't speak about it. Feedback from a particular person did not deem it important enough, the construction industry. Okay, thanks, Brianna. As our workforce is younger, when the menopause policy was launched, people wondered why we had a high impact policy for a small group. Thank you. This is already helpful. From colleagues of mine, they reported fear that admitting to menopause, yep, and the negative side effects would stall career progressions, yep. Minimizing experiences, saying I was too young, must be something else. Yep, thank you. Can't do the poll. Sorry, can't do the poll, Michelle. A colleague said that she'd be reluctant to hire any woman over 45 because she hears, because of what she's hearing about this age. No one believes you can have it younger. What about Perry? My experience was around a lack of understanding of why it would impact work. Thanks, Felicity. I think there's a great deal of ignorance and lack of knowledge around the topic. Okay, good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're probably going to be able to touch on a lot of those concerns, particularly the one Sarah mentioned. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So just before I hand over to Melissa, who's going to share with us a little bit more, I just wanted to take a moment to, I guess, position this issue in time. And if we cast back to perhaps when maternity leave was first introduced, or the concept of even pregnant women being allowed to work, shock, horror. You know, my mum, she had to resign when she first became pregnant, or the concept of things like breastfeeding. Do you think that everyone then got triggered and worried about how this would affect, you know, how women were perceived as reliable, competent employees? Absolutely. I was reading up about the introduction of maternity leave in the 1970s. It was the most, they framed it as the most divisive issue that they'd considered yet. So with the benefit of hindsight, has that reduced employment of women in workplaces? I don't think so. And in fact, one of the fastest growing groups of female participation in the workforce is now amongst females and amongst older women in particular. If another example, if we think about mental health, and when mental health awareness was first raised in workplaces, I mean, I was there 15 years ago doing the work for Beyond Blue in workplaces and writing articles, and the dynamics were very similar. Number one, large numbers of people affected. Secondly, not speaking up because they were worried about being stigmatized. Number three, and that lack of support or seeking of treatment was costly. It's costly to everyone at an individual suffering level and also to workplaces. And look at where mental health is now. It's a number one priority within workplaces. And I don't know of any evidence whether this awareness raising has increased stigma of mental health. You know, if anyone is aware of that, please let me know. But it at least hasn't stopped it becoming an important part of creating psychologically healthy workplaces. And I would say that menopause is where mental health was about 10 or 15 years ago. I think we're right at that forefront. And so we have to accept when we're having conversations about menopause in the workplace that we're at the forefront of cultural change, and there will be discomfort. So I'm sorry to let anyone down who attended today thinking that we could wave a magic wand and eliminate any negative reactions. I'm not promising that. I think this is just par for the course in terms of where we're at. So if your choice is you do want to be part of the change and just make menopause an unremarkable health topic of conversation in the workforce, just like we can talk about any other topic, if you want to be part of that change, there is going to be some discomfort, but there are some smarter ways of doing things. Okay, so this is where I would, in these meetups, I love bringing in people with other perspectives and not just seeing things through my own lens. So I'm really delighted to have Melissa McGowan on board with us today. And Melissa, yeah, again, you might like to have a little bit of a wave and say hi to everyone. So the reason I got Melissa on was when Melissa saw that article, you know, that I showed earlier on, the Shut Up About Menopause one. She did this brilliant 3-minute video in response. And I just said, yeah, what she said and how she said it. And that's why I reached out and, yeah, got in touch. So as I mentioned before, Melissa is a former HR executive, and she's now an executive coach. She's a menopause champion, and she really likes teaching, I guess, the next generation HR leaders how they can accelerate their business impact. And so, Melissa, I'm going to hand over to you here because I'd love to hear from your experience and also from your personal and your background experience, how you might tackle this issue of how we might be able to raise awareness without exacerbating the backlash or bias. And so, yeah, over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Thea. Well, in the late 19th century, it was another time of dissent in Australia as women gained the right to vote. And that progress came with conflict. And even the women themselves were divided. Some feared stepping into that political arena would disrupt society, the norms. They worried about backlash against women. So the path to gender equity and equality, it continues to be complex, right? And there are differing opinions, there are differing concerns. I quit my job at the peak of my corporate career due to menopause-related burnout. So let me declare my bias right now, and that is that we address the systemic drivers of inequity, and in doing so, we can't tiptoe around menopause. My mission now is, as Thea said, to support women really kind of rise and thrive in their careers and in their personal lives. We are all learning here. Anyone who says they've got the proven path is talking BS. So I encourage us all to kind of bring our best growth mindsets and watch out for the confirmation bias that exists in all of us. After this session today, I would love you to consider reconnecting the dots and taking a very coordinated approach to how you're supporting your employees thrive in your workplace, considering a new approach where we're taking that, as I said, coordinated. We're not just staying in our silos or our sub-silos. What are we doing in DEI? What are we doing in culture? What are we doing in wellbeing, safety, talent management? That doesn't necessarily optimize outcomes for women and workplaces measurably in the strategic, cultural, and commercial context in which you operate. As I'm chatting today, I'd love you to jump in the chat anytime. Just please go for it. Let's make this interactive. So it's 2018 and I'm delivering a session to emerging leaders on how to manage their personal energy for sustained performance to support them progress their careers in a healthy way. And the floor starts moving. Or maybe the room's moving, I'm not sure. I know I wasn't hungover. I was suddenly very hot, wobbling, looking embarrassed. I'm about to faint. I stumble out mid-presentation, with no communication, and make it to the nearest bench in the hotel lobby, of course, where we were running the event, where I lie down. Energy management, anyone? So it turns out that vertigo is a symptom of perimenopause. Now, I was the only female in the male-dominated industry, construction, that I was in at the time, leading significant transformational change. But I was on the brink of burnout and terrified to admit it. There was so much to do. And what happened? I experienced a crisis of confidence. I worried about my performance. I turned the pressure inwards and doubled down there because admitting that I was struggling was way too scary. Fear is the opposite of psychological safety. Psychological safety is broadly described as a climate in which people are comfortable expressing being themselves. More specifically, when people have psychological safety at work, they feel comfortable sharing concerns and mistakes without fear of embarrassment or retribution. They're confident they can speak up. They won't be humiliated, ignored, or blamed. In short, psychological safety is a crucial source of value creation in organisations operating in complex, changing environments. That was way too good for it to be from me. That was from Amy Edmondson. So I want you to reflect. Please jump in the chat. Is psychological safety a leadership priority in your organisations? Do your leaders' behaviours communicate safety? What's your experience around psychological safety when you put your business hats on? I'd love to hear. Please share in the chat and I'll keep an eye on it. As you're doing that, I will continue talking, but I'd love to hear about where psychological safety's at. So it's now 2023 and I am coaching leaders to perform at their peak minus burnout. I'm leading programs, working with companies like Australia Post, Oz Minerals. I'm helping emerging women leaders implement new habits, neuroperformance, progress their careers whilst reducing burnout symptoms. Then my one-on-one coaching client, Mel, who I was working with, she just landed a new role. Yay us, right? But what that meant was a new strategy, a new team, and a new raft of challenges. So I was supporting her kind of land in that promotion with clarity and confidence and impact. She came into our coaching session furious. I was like, whoa, God, what's happened today? She said, you wouldn't believe what's happened today. I was like, yeah, tell me. She said, HR announced in the meeting plans to include menopause training at our next upcoming meeting, the all-in leadership meeting. Like, have they completely lost it? We have worked so hard. How am I going to talk to anyone about my brain fog while I am, while I am managing 300 people? Women around here get promoted, they already get labelled as a diversity KPI, and now you want to give us some different treatment. So in our session, she literally had like an amygdala hijack right there, right? Her brain was understandably in a threat state, triggered by fears of being othered again and the unfairness of it all. And I understood. She was also in a very male-dominated industry. What I want to say about that is we need to be inclusive about inclusion. We need to consult. We need to customise. We need to communicate. We need to dive into the data. We don't want to design in a bubble because this is systemic. So stay in the chat and share more. Like, I'd love to hear, what are some of the day-to-day challenges specific to the women in your organisation that they experience? What are some of those day-to-day challenges? Let's anchor into the lives of either ourselves in this context or our customers in the business. What are some of those day-to-day challenges? I'd love to hear that. Because something that I tend to hear often is there's a big disconnect between those day-to-day challenges and the safe places to access support and guidance and connection in the organisations. So please share and let us understand, like, what are some of the real lived challenges of the women in your organisations? Thanks, Kim. because you start to see a connection between psychological safety, what's going on culturally, and just understanding the lives of the diverse range of experiences and women and jobs and situations in our workplaces. So back to me for a minute. Now, just because juggling 4 young children, global travel, like frequent, a big job, a big team, you know, if that wasn't enough, it was the 9th doctor who said, Melissa, I'm sorry to tell you that you are in menopause. Now, I'm 43 at the time, and I'm ready to lead a 2-day strategy session. And I just stopped and broke down and decided I could not push on any more. So I called my boss. This is great. Thank you for sharing this very real experiences in the chat here, the context in which you're operating in. I called my boss and I sought his support, right? I said, you know, I can't travel as much. I need more breaks in these meetings. I'd like to work 4 days a week some weeks. And mostly I would like some empathy with what I'm going through here. Now, the changes that I was helping implement in the organisation at the time really helped me here. You know, I'd introduced flexible working. We were addressing gender balance, particularly at the senior manager and director level, where we went from 4% representation of women to 35%. We started a women's network. We did listening tours. We ran leadership development with inclusion in it. It wasn't a separate thing. We were doing manager skill building. Right, we were going through a safety cultural transformation. So all of those things helped me. He was supportive. He had empathy, not really understanding, right, but he had empathy. And I had a sense of autonomy about what I could do to try and cope better. But what about the women who were less senior than me, who didn't feel that they could share that with their boss? People leave managers, not policies. For all of our talk about policies, I really believe that people leave managers, not policies. Now, Marion Baird is a professor of gender and employment relations in Australia, and she says flexible policy options are essential. She wonders if the highly gendered policies, menopause leave, for example, even a menopause policy, could unintentionally take the outcomes for working women backwards, not forwards. And then from my perspective, not to mention that the cost of these things, if there is a cost associated, for example, leave, shows up on the P&L, whereas the benefits are much less tangible and they don't show up. So Circle In did some fabulous research recently about the middle manager squeeze. We know it, we feel it, we see it. 90% of managers say they are spending a significant amount more time helping team members deal with challenging life issues. It's now become a major part of their role. So while you're on a roll here sharing amazing things, and I hope we can download this chat later, I would love to know, like, how are we helping our managers develop skills to be able to support our people? Because again, my view is people leave managers, not policies, and these managers have never had to deal with and navigate so much complexity, you know, including things like mental health that Thea mentioned before. So how are we supporting our managers do this? Sarah, this is one of the reasons I stepped away from having a manager role. 100%. I mean, being put into that challenging situation without the supports systemically is setting people up to fail and burn out, right? So manager support is really important. I want to finish up with a quote. The problem is women hit what we call the hormone glass ceiling. They've had all this investment in their 30s, only to hit that hormone glass ceiling 5 years later and come a cropper unexpectedly. That's from Dr. Ginny Mansberg. She's one of Australia's, you know, top menopause doctors, and she's got books and all sorts of things. So can we imagine a time where gendered ageism and discrimination is not a thing, and that it would be almost strange to say stay silent on menopause? So, what can we do with all of this going on and everything you're coming up with today? Look, my vote is that we continue to navigate the change with real consideration. We create cultures of psychological safety, meaning it has to be a leadership priority. We customise support in the context with consultation. We connect the dots strategically, particularly in HR. We get out of those sub-silos and get really honest with ourselves around how we're measuring progress. And finally, we support our managers because they're at the front line here. My mantra has always been and continues to be, make it safe, keep it real, but make it happen. So again, growth mindset, right? We are all learning on this. Stay curious, experiment, and keep learning together. And well done for being here today and being part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and you've stimulated lots of discussion in the chat, which hopefully we'll be able to unpack. We're just going to keep going a little bit longer and then we'll open this up for more discussion. So I'm just going to come in at the end here and take, a bit of a different approach. And imagine, let's say you're trying to get up a proposal in your own workplace and you're aware of some of the concerns like you've expressed in the chat box earlier on. There might be a bit of negativity or backlash. And look, this is just hypothetical, that you could incorporate in that proposal a risk management plan where we talk about some of these real or perceived risks and you show what you could actually do about that. And as I'm going, again, please jot in the chat box some of your own ideas as we go. So, Melissa gave that great example of that woman came in and was really angry and said, you wouldn't believe what they've done. They're going to talk about menopause. So I know this is really 101, but sometimes we need to go back to the 101s. It's like, can you consult your people first? That might be, in an ideal world, an anonymous survey where you're getting first of all, you can collect some baseline data for anything else that you want to do, but you just ask the question, what do you think about our workplace, providing these supports for menopause? When I have done them in some of the bigger projects that I've worked, I typically get 99% of people super positive, but you might get the one or two people who are expressing that concern, this is going to reinforce negative stereotypes. But at least you've consulted and you're getting a sense of the proportion. If you're getting 50% saying, no, this is a terrible idea, well, obviously you'd want to dive into that a bit more. But I haven't ever encountered that, I have to say. And this is true of all well-being programs, that you can really get cynicism if people don't believe that the organisation is really behind this. And again, there are many possible ways to counter that, but visible leadership support is really, really powerful. And just to give a simple example, they've given me permission to talk about this publicly. Well, first of all, we have a wonderful leader on the line here, Kim Lyon, who's been really visible and vocal in her support in her own organisation, IPG Media Brands. And also when Aware Super introduced their menopause and menstruation leave recently, really clear, visible support from their CEO, Deanne Stewart. She was on television, she was speaking to her staff, she was addressing all the questions, and they got a very positive response. What can also really help is people want evidence. They want evidence that this isn't going to backfire. So over time, the more you can collect stories or case studies of people who've benefited from the support, that really can make a difference. And obviously there's other things you can do, jot down your ideas. But another risk might feel that, in a male-dominated or hostile culture, this could maybe just be seen as, exposing female weakness. So first of all, don't assume that just because it's male-dominated that it is necessarily hostile. I'm doing a lot of work in an organisation at the moment that is mainly male-dominated, and it's full of really lovely men managers who are coming to the training. So don't make that assumption. But if for whatever reason it's a bit hostile, you might like to take the approach of raising this in a women's or female group first, or a relevant employee resource group. Could be D&I, could be, gender diversity group. So that might create maybe a little safe space first, and you could get their opinions as to how they would like to progress from there. Another approach or concern can be, oh no, I'm worried people are going to run around and put me in the spotlight in the workplace. I don't want, that's private information. And so this is where, the manager training is really important, that you make it very clear it is not your role to diagnose. You would never put someone on the spot individually, but you create a culture where those who are struggling can raise it if they want to, and they know that you're ready for that. But it's also great to look at how could I direct people to sources of support or information that they can do that confidentially. So your EAP provider, ring them up and see if they've got someone who knows about menopause. I know some organizations, line up coaching, even menopause coaching, or is it just the information on the intranet that someone might be able to access? And I know some workplaces make it possible to request accommodations without actually having to talk to your manager. You can just generate that not fair feeling, by people who aren't experiencing menopause, particularly if you're introducing leave. So you could also just say, well, it's actually not really fair, is it, that some people experience severe symptoms, and would you prefer to experience the symptoms or just be supportive of others? But apart from that, maybe you could position this under, we're doing health and wellbeing education around a number of gendered health topics. So by all means, do stuff for men and some of the health challenges that they experience, or, more gender diverse people. So that creates a bigger umbrella, and it might make you feel less that women are being singled out. If you are into offering leave, an approach that I see some workplaces take is that they choose to just offer more general, specific wellbeing leave that anyone could access. Other organisations feel really strongly they want to offer the menopause leave as an important part of, breaking the taboo or stigma. So that's an individual workplace's choice. The other, sorry about my little typo there. The other fear that gets expressed is that, the result of this, employers will look at, females as being a more expensive employment option, either because they're going to take more leave or they're not going to perform as well. We don't know if that's actually true or not. As I said, we haven't seen evidence of that through the introduction of maternity leave or parental leave. But some of the things you can do, and I just really encourage workplaces that are introducing some of these entitlements, just collect the data, because we don't have enough. Can you build some learning infrastructure around your initiatives? Because that's going to be really valuable information. But it is good to remember that if, you aren't being employed, or you're being not offered the promotion because you're a female, there are actually legal protections against that. And in the UK, there are increasing numbers of menopause-related tribunals where most cases the employee is winning on the basis of discrimination. But to get to the big one, and I think, Sarah mentioned this earlier, people are worried that if we focus on the symptoms, it doesn't look good for women, does it? Brain fog, insomnia, moods, that doesn't look good. So when we're going to talk about menopause, I feel a strong responsibility in how I represent midlife women, and I take that responsibility seriously. And so the kinds of things that I would encourage you to check if you're having educational seminars or training, check the messaging, have a look at the content. So some of the things that I really emphasize in my training is, yes, we look at those who are struggling and how we can support them, but generally highlight the strengths of midlife women. And I'm sure there's a lot of you on the line today, and we've got a lot to celebrate, haven't we? We've got a lot to bring. We're an incredible resource for humanity, organisations, communities, etc. So don't miss out that part. We also, of course, have to represent the diversity of experience. It's tricky. Every menopause is different. Some aren't impacted, some are empowered, some are really, really struggling. But can include the whole picture. It's important to avoid making assumptions. We don't know. Even if someone's struggling with the symptoms, it might not impact their productivity. So don't make assumptions. And I go into, let's look at the stigma and taboo. What is it? What does it say? Where does it come from? Shine a light on it. And then when you do that, most people go, ooh, that's yuck, that's revolting, that's got no place in our workplace culture today. So kind of go there and have a look at it. And I also make the point, as I did before, that it's when women are untreated and uneducated and unsupported, that's what hurts women's brand more than if we actually educate and support women through this life stage. There's also how we represent or frame menopause. It's often perceived as the end, and some people are talking about life post-menopause as an entire next life stage of just estrogen deficiency and decline. And, a simple reframe is, it is like reverse puberty. The significance of it is menopause is not just the symptoms. Pan back, it's a transition to a next life stage that is really important, and it can take women deeper into their authority than ever before, if they're given the education and support along the way. So this is when we're talking, I guess, about other people or menopause generally, but then also how we speak up is important. And so there's kind of the inner work to be done as well as changing the systems. And you know, Newton's law that says every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So as hard as it might be, you know, the more that we can just speak up about this, no big deal, matter of fact, I don't have to get angry and I don't have to apologize. That can set the tone of how we think about menopause as well. And so these are the kinds of messages I include in my training, and I do evaluate what I do because, you know, we might not always get it right. So this is hot off the press, and sorry if it's a bit small. So the manager training that I do, I not only look at how it affects their knowledge and competence on how to support women, but their attitudes towards menopause itself. You can see at the beginning of the training, you know, maybe, I don't know, 12, 15% might say, oh yeah, menopause could be a time of opportunity or even an empowering life stage. And you can see that that increases by the end of the training. Also get a shift in levels of embarrassment. So you get a reduction in levels of embarrassment, basically. More people disagreeing that this is an embarrassing topic to talk about. So when you get the right tone, you can bring about positive shifts in attitudes towards menopause rather than the negative ones. And then in the programs that I run to support individual women, where we do a lot about inoculate yourself against the negative stereotypes, you can also get this wonderful shift in how they perceive menopause, and also that they see that they're far more able to manage their role as well as their symptoms. And you can get a lovely shift in self-perception. So the how we do the education, I think, is important. And I'm going to stop there because that was a little bit of a download, but there were just some ideas about how we might be able to mitigate some of these perceived risks. And we've now got time for Q&A and discussion.